So, is it crazy to think that Jesus came back from the dead? Well, yes, it absolutely is. But today, we get J. Warner Wallace trying to make a case, a really, really bad case, for why people ought to flush away their brains and just believe. Because these people are just imbeciles. But that's hardly a surprise, is it? So today, we're back with another video suggested by friend of the channel Toaster, who wants me to look at a J. Warner Wallace claim on the resurrection of Jesus. I think we already know this isn't going to go well for the theists, but hey, why not? We'll give it a shot. You never really know what J-Dubs is going to come up with, and maybe he might try something remotely coherent. I mean, I wouldn't be holding my breath or anything, but I guess we'll see. So, thank you once again to Toaster, keep 'em coming, and let's get on to the video. Well, we don't. Nobody does. We have no actual evidence to support it, because that's what it would take for us to accept it as true. Evidence, not claims in a book of mythology, not religious wishful thinking and blind faith. Evidence. You got any of that? I'm going to go out on a limb here and predict the answer is no. Why not? Because these people don't actually give a damn. That's why it's so easy to debunk every single one of these videos, because the answer is always the same. Where's your evidence that any of that ever happened at all? You got none? Great. Come on back when you do. Yet they never do, right? And that's kind of a problem.
How do we know what really happened? This thing we call the resurrection. How do we know that's actually true? Do we have any good evidence? Is there even a way, an approach we could take evidentially to determine if the Christian story about the resurrection is true?
And the answer is still no. Now, I'm sure he'll try to get around that, but the simple fact is, you can't just take stories and call them evidence and pretend that makes it at all true. That's what the religious are going to try to do, though, which is why they rely on faith, not facts. Because if they had facts, they wouldn't need faith. But let's give him a chance and see how badly his claims turned out, shall we?
Well, actually there is, because in every crime scene, we typically look at the evidence in the room.
Yeah, but you don't have any evidence in the room. I mean, you don't even have a room. It's not like you have a body. In this case, that's kind of the point. But you don't even have a crime scene. You have no demonstrable eyewitnesses of any kind. You have absolutely nothing at all. You have a book of mythology and a bunch of empty claims made by anonymous people that you really wish was true, but for which you have no evidence whatsoever. And this is why his detective shtick doesn't hold true when it comes to religion, because at least at a legitimate crime scene, one that actually exists, there are things that you can look at and things you can investigate. Here, he's got nothing. But I'm willing to be patient and see where this goes, because that gives us more to laugh at, right?
And then we look at a list of explanations for the evidence, and we use a process called abductive reasoning to determine which explanation is most reasonable in light of the evidence in the room. Well, in this case, we could do something similar. When I was an atheist, I didn't think much of the story about the resurrection was true, but I would have given you a few key points. I would have said, yes, Jesus, he really lived and he died on a cross, but so what? Doesn't mean the resurrection is true. And I would have said the tomb was empty. Okay, so what? Doesn't mean that the tomb, he actually rose from the dead. I can explain an empty tomb a number of different ways.
Then you would have been an idiot. I mean, are an idiot, but I guess nothing has changed. I'm not willing to grant any of that because you have no evidence for any of that. For the two that he's got on screen so far, let's talk about those. All you have are stories, nothing more, and those stories can't be corroborated independently at all. There's no Roman record that shows that they crucified somebody named Yeshua. You just have stories in a book of mythology written decades after the supposed events, following a prolonged game of telephone. There is absolutely no way to get from the stories to any demonstrable facts. Secondly, there's no reason to think that there was a tomb at all. The overwhelming majority of cases of crucifixion left the bodies hanging on the cross until it rotted and was eaten by dogs or birds or whatever, and then they were all just thrown into a mass grave to decompose. We have one and only one example so far of anybody who was ever put into a tomb, and there's an awful lot of details there that are still very iffy. You've got a whole lot of work to do to show that Jesus was ever put in a tomb in the first place, and you can't even prove Jesus existed. This is just Wallace showing what a crap crime scene investigator he is. But let's continue.
I would have said, yeah, it appears they would say that they saw the risen Christ, and they actually seem to believe it, but so what? People see or think they see and believe all kinds of crazy things.
You don't have any eyewitnesses, though. You have anonymous people writing stories decades after the supposed fact, but nobody that you can actually prove was there. This is not Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Paul wasn't even an eyewitness to anything. His only claim to fame was a drug trip on the way to Damascus. He never even claimed to have seen the risen Christ. He just had a vision. And I hope you've got something better than this, because what you've got so far, it isn't remotely impressive.
And lastly, it does appear that they were transformed by seeing this. They were willing to die for what they believe, but so what? People die for things that aren't true all the time.
How about the 9/11 hijackers, for instance? Tons of Muslim suicide bombers. The followers of David Koresh and Jim Jones. I mean, the examples are numerous. Religion makes people do stupid stuff all the time. Now, I'm sure he's going to make up excuses for why all of that stuff has to be true, but it's not. This is just going to be an exercise in abject stupidity, but then again, this is J. Warner Wallace we're talking about, so let's just let him get to it.
So I would have said, I'll give you those four things. As an atheist, it doesn't make the Christian story true because there's your four pieces of evidence. Now I can make a list of explanations.
But none of those things are evidence. Those were just gimmies that you're willing to grant to the Christians. I'm not willing to grant any of those because we don't have any corroboratory evidence to back any of it up. Because this is where he starts to go wrong. And really, he starts to go wrong at day one, but this is where he starts to get bad. That's not evidence. Those are claims, and claims mean absolutely nothing until they're backed up with objectively demonstrable facts. Things that we can examine and study independently of any ideas that we might have about them. The religious are just satisfied with the claims because it gets them where they want to go for emotional reasons. But no actual investigator, no credible investigator, would ever take these bald-faced claims seriously without some kind of demonstrable corroboration. Like I said, Wallace is a crap investigator.
And the explanations, I would have offered 5 or 6 of these that an atheist would typically offer. I don't think he really died on the cross. Or maybe they were lying about this. Or maybe they hallucinated it. Or maybe an imposter stood in his place. Or maybe the story was distorted over time. I could give you a number of these.
The list can go on and on and on and on. He's still taking the basic story for granted, though, something I'm not willing to do. Because what he's essentially doing here is the equivalent of rolling up to a 911 call, somebody saying, well, there was a murder 40 years ago, but nobody ever saw it. We've got no evidence that there ever was a dead person. There's just some stories, but there's no way to tell that any of it is actually true. There's no legitimate missing persons report, no evidence that this person was ever real to begin with. But whoever happened to call 911, and we don't even know who that is, they want you to treat it as if it's an actual crime and find out who done it. Now, any credible investigator would say, yeah, thanks for the call and leave. There's no reason to think this is a legitimate claim. It doesn't matter if it's one person standing there in the corner or a million. There's still no evidence that a crime has taken place. Yet, still, Wallace persists. I wonder why. Could it be, fee-fees?
Now, one of them would have to be your Christian explanation, too. It just actually happened the way it's reported in the Bible.
Nope, sorry, that's not a credible explanation. Any more than saying that aliens showed up and beamed Jesus off the cross. If the Bible is credible, then so too is the alien story, and probably a lot of other things you could just make up. He won't accept that, though, because that's not where he wants to go. Why not Thor riding a unicorn coming to the rescue? If we're just making stuff up and that's really all he's doing, we might as well just go crazy. I mean, crazier than the religious. But this is why they don't really want to talk to us, because we're more creative than they are, and we can see right through what they're trying to do. We don't have a goal in mind like they do. We just care about the truth. It's why he's willing to admit one supernatural explanation, but absolutely no others. Because that's the one he really wants.
But that's only one of 7 possible ways of explaining those 4 pieces of evidence. Think about it. Abductive reasoning says, I go back and forth and I cross out what I've discovered. As you do that, as you look at the 4 pieces of evidence and the 7 explanations, you're going to end up crossing out all the explanations because they don't work.
Only because you stacked the deck in your favor. Remember, there aren't just 7 possible explanations. He just arbitrarily stopped there, but there could be many, many more. The 4 things that he started with, they aren't evidence, but he lets that in because that's what he wants to believe. You have to remember that there's no reason to think that Jesus existed at all, at least not as a real human being. Certainly, the stories told about Jesus in the Bible are complete nonsense, so that version of Jesus is just made-up bunk. But he wants to start off with the assumption that it all happened as recorded, which, again, just proves what a crap investigator he actually is, because if he applied any of this kind of irrational thinking to an actual crime scene, he'd get bounced out on his ear. Well, maybe they were killed by Bigfoot. What? What in the hell are you smoking? Because my list of possible explanations, which bears no resemblance to his at all comes down to a single question. Where is your evidence for any of this? And they just don't have any.
Did he die on the cross? I mean, these don't work. Now I would have said, well, wait a minute. Your Christian explanation doesn't work either, because your Christian explanation requires me to believe in a supernatural act called a resurrection. And I was out as far as that was concerned. I didn't believe in anything supernatural.
Nor should you. But you shouldn't believe any of the things that you're calling evidence either, because they're not. It's like going to a supposed crime scene to see if a murder took place. Is there any blood? Nope, none at all. Are there any actual eyewitnesses to the supposed crime? Nope. Is anybody missing? Nope. So where is this demonstrable crime? That's what we're asking. Where is the demonstrable crime? You don't have one. No demonstrable Jesus, no demonstrable crucifixion, no demonstrable tomb, empty or otherwise. You've got no eyewitnesses, just claims made decades after the supposed events by people who, hell if we'd know who the hell they were, they're just writing down stories. Where is your evidence? You don't have any. You just really, really, really wish that there was a crime, and that just isn't good enough.
But then I asked myself, wait a minute, what's the whole investigation about? What is this whole investigation? It's about whether or not a supernatural event like the resurrection could ever be considered reasonable.
And the answer is no. Magic is never going to be a reasonable explanation for anything. At least not until you can prove that magic is real. This has nothing at all to do with not wanting it to be an explanation. You just don't have any evidence that it is. That's what it requires after all. evidence. If you want to prove the supernatural is a thing, you need to come to us with evidence that it exists. Go ahead. This is something else that I point out a lot. They can't even explain what the supernatural is. They can tell us what it's not natural. Cool, then what is it? What is it made of? How do we detect it? How do we test for it? Because if we can't detect it, then what's the difference between the supernatural and the non-existent? You need to come up with evidence, and you have none. Until you can prove that it exists, there is no reason to think that any supernatural explanation is remotely real. Do better, because until you can, you're just wasting everyone's time.
Well, if that's what we're investigating, you cannot begin by rejecting supernatural events. And once I realized that the thing that was keeping me from embracing the Christian response was not an evidence issue, it was a presupposition issue.
No, that's not even what we're investigating. You're all over the place, dude. What we're investigating here is if there even was a resurrection. But you've entirely missed out on everything that leads up to it. Was there a Jesus? Where's your evidence for that? You can't just say, well, why not? That's not how facts work. You need to provide direct, demonstrable, testable evidence that there ever was a guy named Jesus. I mean, that specific Jesus. How do you know it? I don't care what you want to believe. I care what you can demonstrate. Go ahead. Because one should do that, and let's be honest, you're never going to even get close to that one. But once you do, you still have a lot more steps to get through. Demonstrate that your specific Jesus was crucified. Where's the independently verifiable Roman records that prove it? Where are the demonstrable eyewitness accounts for any of this? You know, people who you can prove were actually there. Then prove the tomb. Let's see your evidence that there ever was a Joseph of Arimathea. Go ahead, because these are all claims that your entire case rests on. Back it up with something besides your flapping lips and blind faith, because we're not even at a point where you can suggest explanations. You aren't even close to that. You're still back at step one, waving your arms around, making a fool of yourself. You have to do a whole lot better than that.
I realized the only thing standing between me and the Christian explanation was me.
No, it was logic, reason, and a complete lack of evidence. Because what he's saying here is just stupid, and that goes for any claim at all. Even if you just stick with religions, you can get to any religious claim by saying, the problem is me. If you just blindly believe whatever the religion says, then of course it's going to sound reasonable, because you're just being a gullible git. The only thing standing in the way of Elvis still being alive is me. Do you understand just how stupid that sounds? Of course not, because you're an idiot. And that's the problem.
Test them for yourself. Imagine every way you could explain those 4 pieces of evidence, and you will see that none of them work. Except for the Christian view, if you're willing to lay down your bias against the supernatural.
And I already proved that's wrong. This is where all of this crap falls apart. He doesn't have 4 bits of evidence. He has 4 bold claims. If Wallace doesn't even understand what evidence is, then he's an even worse investigator than I thought. Because evidence needs to be defensible and demonstrable, and absolutely nothing that Wallace has presented is. It's just stuff that you yanked completely out of your backside on faith and fifis, and that's not impressive at all. If that's the best you can do, you're in worse shape than I thought.
And as I did that, I realized that by far the Christian explanation was the most reasonable explanation of the resurrection.
Then you have no clue what reasonable means either, because magic is never going to be a reasonable explanation, at least not until you can prove that magic actually exists. I mean, seriously, how crap were you at your job, J-Dub? Well, why not leprechauns? Maybe leprechauns did it. I mean, the only thing standing between the case and the truth of leprechauns is you, right? But that's not how reality works. This is just Wallace proving what an idiot he is once again. This is the crap that gets your brain poisoned when it comes to this stupid religious crap. Why not believe? That's not a rational position to take. It's why skeptics ask why and not why not. There has to be a good reason for it, and the religious never have one. It's all fee-fees and faith, and never facts and evidence. I figure that's probably what Toaster was trying to get at when I got this video, although Toaster can certainly clarify that in the comments. It's why all of these theists are such a joke. They aren't concerned with reality. They don't care at all. In fact, most of them are probably terrified of reality. They just want to be happy, and that's not a rational way to look at the world. Wallace wasn't rational in 2019 when this came out, and he's sure the hell not rational today. Rationality isn't paying his bills. Appealing to stupid people is, because this whole thing is just a scam. But then again, what the hell else is new?